Only 1 month of university was enough for Kaaveh. At 18, he packed up, moved to LA, and pursued a career of on air entertainment, hosting a news show for the global Persian community. He then moved into producing and talent management, working with shows like HGTV and Netflix. At HGTV, he worked on the popular real estate show that I'm sure we have all watched, Love It or Listed, handling brand and product integrations. After 21 years of product placement experience, he founded Plaiced, a platform enabling advertisers to reach their target audience within an online community. Marketers now have the simple and direct access to their target audience via private online communities at scale, reaching over 150 million within the network. Swearing all that very kosher,
Okay.
balls to the wall, all good to
They
say.
call me Kosher Kaaveh, all my Jewish friends. Kosher Kaaveh.
I love that.
I
Okay,
want
so
a t-shirt Kosher Kaaveh from now on, yeah.
that's a good one. Kaveh, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I'm so excited to tell your story and talk about all the amazing tools and products that you have built and very fun stories that you've been a part of throughout your career as an entrepreneur in the entertainment industry, and so much more. I want to start with your journey of going from Canada to LA. What drove you to make that decision, and kind of the inspiration that took you to LA?
Well, the inspiration that took me to LA was interesting because it was one of failure, actually. I was a soccer player, playing soccer for a few hours a day, training every day for many years, and then eventually tried out for Team Canada U17 team. And then after I got cut on the first cut, after that I decided that forget about this. I always want to go to LA to pursue in TV and film, but then or be a professional soccer player. And I immediately jumped over the TV and film side, and I felt that LA is the mecca for that. And I had family there to make it easier to get in there and convince the parents to stake me to get out there. So it worked out in the end, and I was able to be with my cousins and then live somewhat of an interesting life over there.
What was the first couple of weeks like when you got there, and what did you envision LA to be like, or your role in LA? Like, did you want to be a big celebrity? Was it to be on the producer side? What was the goal?
By then, I still wanted to be an actor, or I should say, I still want to be a professional working actor. Of course, at that age, we had the limelight. You'd watch these movies, you want to emulate it, you'd want that feeling of, coming out. It was very naive, but that feeling of the red carpet feeling and so on. Of course, it's still fun to think about now. But as soon as I realized how the system worked, that actors, the constant rejection by the actors, the hunting, the hustling, but chasing, and then even when you did get a gig, it's still you still not necessarily control, but you still didn't have any benefit for the creative that you just helped elevate. And then immediately I realized that one, I wasn't the greatest actor in the world. I definitely knew that. But two, I also knew that I my strength was putting things together and bringing things to fruition pretty quickly. So I realized that the producer role was something that was more interesting to me, and then went into producing.
Was it hard at the time? Because it sounds like you faced a little bit of rejection from soccer to, okay, maybe acting isn't exactly the route I'm going to be, and you were pivoting quite a bit. How did you keep yourself going, even though I'm sure that, those realizations were really difficult?
Uh, the output of a form of depression that was within me during this time, it manifested itself in procrastination a lot of times. It manifested itself in not moving as fast, and it also manifested itself of procrastinating, yes, but also doing other things, anything but intentionally. So I would say that if I had someone at the time, or I had the wherewithal to even think about, uh, like a therapist or something like that, to actually speak about some of my problems at the time that I was facing, I feel like I would have gotten certain places faster. So that was an interesting. That's essentially where it took me. It was a journey. It was just a longer journey than it needed to be.
Do you think though, sure, you might have gotten somewhere quicker, but by having a little bit more of like a drawn out journey, you were able to learn about yourself more or figure pieces out more to get where you're supposed to be versus rushing? Like maybe you'd still be, 5 years longer into trying to make it into an acting career or something along those lines. Can there be a benefit to
Yeah.
those rejections?
My answer that I gave prior to your question, which is related to your question, is my answer was flawed, because by virtue of me saying that it would have went faster, that's on the presumption that uh, we have some kind of control over our lives in the grander perspective. So
Right.
in actuality, I retract that, and in a way, answering your question now is that I realize that we don't have true control. So when I say it, it's actually not authentic. The reality is that, yeah, sure, on paper, it sounds like it would have been faster, but I'm pretty sure it happened the way it was supposed to happen. I do feel that as humans, we're very fast to adapt. So if it was faster, and it wasn't the normal time it was supposed to be, I mean, if it was faster, then in that case, I would have been able to adapt, just because we're very resilient species. So I do
Definitely.
believe that we would have made it. I would have made it work. It wouldn't have been too rushed, or something like that. But I do feel the amount of time it was the amount of time it was supposed to be.
Have you, as life has gone on and matured and figured things out, there's still going to be failures in everyone's life. Does that procrastination tactic still creep in?
Yeah, procrastination gets you, doesn't it? It's definitely something that it's not always, by the way, in my belief, tied to depression. Sometimes just got a lot of things to do, and either overwhelmed or overworked, right? So in my particular case, procrastination does still come in, but now, because I feel that I'm currently doing something that's aligned with my personal North Star and the North Star of the business. Therefore, on a daily basis, I just genuinely feel more fulfilled. And because of that fulfillment, that's what drives me. And thinking of my son, these are the kinds of things that are driving me to not procrastinate. And then time, lack of time, seeing that, every gray hair that comes in, every next day and starts adding up. Those are reminders that time is limited. So uh, do action one day at a time, and then you'll get to where you want to go.
Yeah, it's almost, I find for myself, if I procrastinated when I was younger, as I get older, there's still things you procrastinate on, but you get better at prioritizing important things. So yes, something will be procrastinated, but it's hopefully at the bottom of the list, and you can kind of balance some of those pieces and yeah, get closer to that North Star. I want to talk a bit about the TV show. Tapping into the Persian community. Was that, you found success there, and so even though maybe it wasn't acting, you found a way to get yourself like a success, a check mark within the entertainment world. So what was that experience like, and how did you find that niche, and that was where you wanted to tap into?
It was the lowest cost of entry, and it's the only thing I knew. I didn't know about developing, pitching. Um, I didn't know about pitching different broadcasters, try to get a green light, and then commissions, licensing fees. I didn't know any about any of that. So I just knew that there was these Persian satellite channels that aired around the world, and I knew that they weren't paying too much for a lot of their content, other than their anchor shows with their sponsors. But otherwise, they basically opened it up for anyone that wanted to create a show to come in. But you had to produce the show, you had to pay for the show, you get your own sponsors, and then you had to split it with them. And I understand. I mean, at the end, they're giving the eyeballs. So it was the low cost of entry that way. And then, fortunately, at that time, because I didn't have the money to pay for the studios at the time, I didn't have an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur then officially, but we ended up realizing that, what, I need to get sponsors fast, and this is kind of tied to the product placement angle. Is that we had to find a way to get as many, from mortgage brokers to, these weren't big brands. These are mortgage brokers, just the real people out there, realtors, whatever we can do. And then we ended up doing a variety show for the second generation. And that experience was, I was learning every day on the job. The first couple shows very embarrassing to watch when I look back at them. I produced that show. And then eventually over time, because there wasn't another show out there like it, because my Farsi at the time wasn't as strong. It's still not native, but it's much stronger than it was before. But at that time, I got made fun of a lot for my language. But the thing is that a lot of kids that were my age at the time that grew up here, they also had that same level of Farsi, so they related. So then that was something that resonated with people. So it just spawned me to keep going, and then eventually had to shut it down after 100 episodes because couldn't afford just to keep it open. We were burning money all the time with no benefit at the end.
Was there benefit in other ways, like getting, learning about product placement or tiptoeing you into the product placement space? Because I think from there you got involved with HGTV,
Yeah,
if my timeline is correct.
absolutely. So what happened was right after, I didn't realize that I was getting an education 101 in product placement. Producing, I didn't even know I was getting a 101 on that. I just wanted to do X. And I think that's, as a quick digression, that's a really great lesson for entrepreneurs there in that moment right there. And that's something that you may not, and that's why some of the best startups out there that are successful, there's many factors to them, but some of the best ones are when they don't have industry knowledge. At least one of the founders does have an industry knowledge. And in that case, I didn't really have industry knowledge, but that naiveness allowed me to just cross lines in terms of doing action faster than perhaps if you asked a seasoned pro, should you do this? Should you rent this? Should you shoot it like this? Should you interview this? Should you put these two together? Should you edit it like this? And I just ignored all those and we just did the actions. And then that eventually got me going over to realizing I didn't want to do it anymore because of financially, I had to sustain myself. And then I saw an ad to a show called Love It or List It on HGTV. And then eventually applied for that and then said that, look, I have about 100 episodes of getting free stuff for shows and also getting money for shows. So I'd love to talk to you about it. And I was fortunate that Marie Armstrong at the time, she was one of the creators of the show. And she brought me in and then eventually gave me that job. I always was a salesperson and an entrepreneur at heart. And of course, one that is still learning every day. But at the time when I was doing these things, I did these things since I was maybe 8 years old, 9 years old, putting on little shows for my parents, and then eventually for more people, and then different events and so on. And all of this just originated from again, being naive and not understanding, just doing action, and that action led me to being slightly fearless. I mean, nervous, but slightly fearless in terms of again, I thought I was so good at what I did in terms of getting sponsors on the Persian show. I thought, this is no brainer. It's great. I'm so great at it. I could have fallen down and failed, but again, that naiveness, I think, really helped me there, or that ignorance really helped me in that case. But in Love It or List It's case, what I had in my corner to help me not fail, because I generally did really well in that show, thanks to the team there and everything, but was because the fact that the name of the show was already on for a few seasons. So it already did really well. So when I was talking to brands, they already knew the show, and then it was a little bit easier than if it was a no-name show. Then maybe I would have failed a lot in that case.
You went from a founder of product placement, which is kind of what we've been talking about, to still a company around product placement, but you're a tech founder. So I'm curious the difference that you're experiencing in being a founder in these two different industries or worlds, and what you have learned as a leader in these spaces.
So right now we advertise within online community groups, right? But in our initial iteration of our company, Plaiced, was a dating site for brands and producers. a marketplace bringing brands and producers of TV and film together to do brand deals. Brand to pay in the content, gets integrated into the content. You watch the show because it was funded by the brand or partially funded. So we made this process easier by having a marketplace self-serve platform that allowed that to happen for Plaiced. That was the initial iteration. And then eventually moved on to advertising and online communities. But those latter two were all tech related because they were self-serve platforms. So I was never a founder in tech before. So what I learned from that is that, again, that same naiveness, ignorance, not fully knowing and starting to learn on the job, but the fundamentals of building a business, the fundamentals of building a product was very similar to any product I had built before from scratch, any event, any show, anything. So for me, that's something that was very transferable. And I was very, very, very fortunate, truly very fortunate to have an incredible CTO, Hossein. And he explained everything to me as if I was reading the dummy's guide to tech. And I would ask him questions. Even back then, I didn't even know what UX UI was, which, of course, the design, the visual, and then the text design and so on. And I didn't even, and the flow and the experience of the user. So I didn't even know what those kinds of things were back then. But I even asked them that, to that basic level in terms of where I was then. And now, of course, thanks to him and thanks to just being around it for so long and learning and reading, I feel like I've got something to say now.
I like this theme throughout of being naive, but obviously you've also been so curious and confident enough to ask questions and feel dumb, because that's what's gotten you to the places that you are. If you were just too shy or had an ego and like, I'm going to pretend I know everything, you would never be able to achieve those things. So I think for founders who are listening, just because you are a founder or just because are the top of the food chain at your company doesn't mean you need to know everything. And it's that age old saying of make sure you're the dumbest person in the room and be surrounded by everyone else, and that's what's going to make you successful. And I feel that even just from the few bits of narrative that you've shared, that's your story as well.
I never articulated like that, but thank you. That's actually giving me some things to think about
You
now.
can use that.
Yeah, now I'll speak with my therapist about it. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, more therapy talk. I'm curious about your childhood and what has influenced your success, because right off the bat, you mentioned that your parents were supportive of your journey from Canada to LA and getting you started with your cousins and family over there. So were there other pieces of your childhood that influenced your success?
Absolutely. So my mom has schizophrenia. And so growing up, thankfully now she's stable. So I'm very grateful for that for many, many years, over 15 years now. But initially,
Wow.
I was with her on the weekends because my parents were divorced. And then what happened was, you'd see all the symptoms and of someone that's like that. So for example, we're on the bus and then in Ottawa, because that's where I lived initially. And you could see her having a typical symptom of schizophrenia, or at least what I'm aware of, is she was talking to herself. And then as she was talking to herself, I could see other people, the way they were looking at her, especially back then. I'm not 20, as you can see by my beard, but the point is that you could feel the way people were looking at her and judging her. And I completely understand. But I was an impressionable child. And the way I saw people looking at her, it built resentment within me about people that have leverage over others or in a better position than others, and then looking down on someone else or making someone feel that they're higher than them. That chip started to develop on my shoulders. And then that chip grew to a point where it became the ethos and the purpose of my life, which is to enable the 99% of the people out there in the world to democratize all opportunity of privilege. So the 99% have the same privilege as the top 1%. Whether they choose to take that on with that opportunity, that's up to them, but at least to give them the opportunity of privilege. And that is something that stayed true. And that's why we're democratizing the advertising industry now. And that's why we have not taken any investment in our company. That's why we're bootstrapped, because of that same ethos.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sure that has, not just as a young child, but throughout, your experience has impacted you. So I appreciate you sharing. I think there was also bits of your story that you and I talked about on our pre-call about like the immigrant process and how you are stepping in there as well within Canada. So I'd love if you would share a little bit about what you're working on and why that has been, a passion project for you as well.
Sure. So a good segue actually is from that purpose. So a lot of times when someone's an immigrant coming to a new place, or you're a fish out of water, or whatever it is, you come to a new
Yeah.
country. That's how you feel for the majority of people. And then again, you're in a very vulnerable position. So because it aligns, everything speaks back to that purpose for me in my life. So whenever I feel that there's something special for me. I'm not an immigrant. There's something special to me. My dad, my mom is, and seeing people struggle in any race, whether they're immigrants or not. But now we're talking about immigrants, was very important to me. And I knew that with the different connections that I had, after having many friends that are immigrants and hearing their stories, enough validation to realize that there's a small difference, a small actionable difference in the first few months of an immigrant story, where they can either immerse themselves in their own culture within that, especially in Canada and US with the melting pot. They can immerse themselves in their own culture and then really be years away, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, even maybe never, of being in Canada, for example, or US, and as if they're still in their home country. And then there's other ones that are really immersing themselves, integrating themselves in the country that they're in US and Canada, without losing their culture, but assimilating without losing their culture. And then those ones usually are highly successful, or at least have the opportunity to be more successful, if you would take, of course, it's anecdotal, but just from the observations I've made. So that for me, that gap, that difference in gap, that first few months is so important. So during Placed and after Placed, if there is an after Placed, then after Placed, we want to build an immigrant accelerator integrator that is free services for all immigrants. We want to be able to help 1 billion immigrants across 10 years in various countries to be able to have free services so they can integrate into society in under a year rather than 5 years. That includes giving them a network of people that they can communicate with, a community that they can tie with. They can get a job faster. We're going to help them with that. And if they don't speak English, we're going to help them with the English as second language. They want a bank card. They want, their transportation card. They want to get approved for something, whatever it is, for a car, and for a loan, for getting into, rent somewhere. They need references, all those kinds of things. We want to help them with that. And for me, that's very important. For now, during Placed, we're going to be doing, we've already done our focus group. So now we're going to be implementing a couple services for free for immigrants just to start it off. And that's to be determined which of the services we're going to be providing. But post Placed, we're definitely going to do something much bigger under the legacy of my parents.
It's such a beautiful initiative, and it's funny that you bring this up. 2 days ago, I met this fellow who moved to Canada from Uganda in January. He was telling me that he made a point when he came to Canada to not find a Uganda community, because I asked him, like, is that who like how did you find friends? You're here all alone. But he said, I came here to challenge myself. So step
Sure.
one is becoming as Canadian as I can, and then I'll go back to my roots. And I just had never really heard that perspective before, but it's interesting to hear, from your point anecdotally, that is maybe a potential successful route to integrate into a new country. I'm sure it's
I don't,
incredibly challenging.
I don't think, yes, totally. And I half agree
Okay.
with the person from Uganda that I don't think a full alienation needs to happen of their own culture, but I think an immersion of that culture does not need to happen initially. They could
Right.
still live the day to day with their culture in terms of their home and how they do it. But I just mean to be more specific, so it's not taken a different way. Is that to physically live in an area where you
Yeah.
have, let's say, if you're Persian, you have all Persians around you, and
Yeah.
you live in that area. Sure, it feels comfortable, feels easier, and they're speaking that language naturally. They're not going to speak English to you; they're going to speak the language. So, just even living in downtown instead, or of that's that changes the game just alone. But still going back and forth, especially for the food, but still going back and forth. Yeah,
I
to the
think that was his point as well. He just didn't want to become, feel like he was in mini Uganda within Canada. He
totally.
wanted to like
Yeah.
expose himself, which it's already such a difficult thing to come to a brand new country and be all alone. So, I mean, someone who's picking up and moving is already so courageous. I just thought it was an interesting perspective that I
Totally.
hadn't heard. But on the topic of these companies and ideas that you're building, I do want to tap into Plaiced finally and talk about how you built that business. And you did mention that you did not go the VC route, that you are bootstrapping. I'm curious about the challenges that you have been faced in making that decision and how you think that's affected the growth of the company and the trajectory of it by bootstrapping, so still being 100% in control, but also perhaps slower growth because you don't have that funding behind you.
In the end, what are we, right? I mean, if you think about what do we stand for, is ties to this answer. Is that are we? What do we tie value to? I tie value to now in this part of my life. I mean, not always. I probably would have went for a VC route if I was 20. But what I tie value to, my purpose. I tie value to time and the freedom of doing what you want in that time. And so, because of that, my purpose, I've already mentioned a couple of times on this. So, to not reiterate that, in addition to that, the value of time and the freedom to be able to move as you wish and to make changes as you pivot and iterate without a large board. That's very astute. Um, but I want to be able to make the change that our team collectively decides on, which is in a form a board. And that for me, those things are what I value. So to scale to multiple billions of dollars, yes, I do believe that Placed is on its way there. As far as, um, but that doesn't get me excited to scale to multiple billions. Of course, I would like it. Of course, it'd be nice to give the financial freedom and help others and do other things. But that value of having that precious time back and to be able to help people in the way you want to help people, to elevate online communities in a way where they can have a great quality of life without worrying about if we hit the third quarter results or not, and without worrying about the month over month, the 20x or 30x or 100x for a VC, without worrying about that kind of multiple, because then you compromise some of the things you're doing, because now your North Star becomes that multiple. And I don't want our North Star to be that multiple. I want our North Star to be, I want our North Star to be heart driven. And yes, of course, it's profit and it's sustainable, but it doesn't have to be 1,000x multiple, even though it will scale one day with the help of the communities to that level of that scale.
When you first got started, I think you started with pitching at Startup Montreal. What was that experience like when you initially had this idea and you were bringing it to life, and trying to navigate what starting Placed would actually look like?
Yes, Startup Fest was really great, and it's true. I was pitching, and earlier on, that's what I did. I pitched because it was about a few
Yeah.
years ago. So I pitched a lot, and in fact, some of those were competitions. By the way, just to clear that up, is that some of them were competitions to hopefully get money because there's a
Oh,
prize at
okay.
the end. In this particular case, that was about 100K or something like that. So I did pitch, and the pitching experience was wonderful. I pitched because we wanted that exposure. We wanted other people to know who we were. And I also wanted the validation. Meaning that I wanted to validate the idea, I should say. I didn't want the validation, but I wanted the idea to be validated. And actually, Startup Fest Montreal was the exact place that we decided to pivot from a product placement marketplace over to a online community advertising platform. And that was very monumental for us there because of that.
What drove that decision to pivot?
This one particular, this one angel investor, I knew her through some mutual colleagues and so on in her before she was an angel investor. And I felt that she said something to me about a certain level of scale. She said that if you're going to do, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but if you're going to do something, make sure it aligns with what means something to you as you're going to be navigating through the ups and downs. Because right now, with product placement, it is a $23 billion market, but you are augmenting an existing industry. Wouldn't it be more exciting if you're able to, again, in so many words, align with your ethos, align with something that means to you, and change the game? There was another founder there named Jacqueline, fantastic company. And initially, she was pitching at the time cleaning up space debris in space, but also was mentioning that she believes that she can get people to Jupiter, not people, but she can get a shuttle to Jupiter in 2040. And that kind of that kind of talk, there's a lot of validity to her. But in the end, I realized that it's a system, it's a game. It's you say certain things about on a bigger scale. If you choose the right words, you can play the system and you can raise all the money you want to raise. And I'm talking about playing the system, but above board. I'm not talking about lying or being deceitful. But I'm saying truly, you can do that. That turned me off of going that system. So I just stuck to my purpose and aligned with that instead of playing any kind of game and just being authentic.
Must have made it a really exciting to figure out how to bring your personal North Star into the business and get the ball rolling. I'm sure even though you didn't end up, raising or getting VC at the time, if that was part of the mindset, but figuring out, okay, how are we going to make this thing work in a really meaningful way is like almost
Yeah.
a more incredible outcome of the event.
Yes. Even with everything I believe about doing it yourself and bootstrapping, it is certain startups, certain grow ups, they do need capital. They do need outside capital. The way our business model is structured, we can build a multi-billion dollar company without outside capital. So because of that, it's not something that we needed to do that. There's a legal tech company, a friend of mine, Alexi, for example, or Hudson Labs. Well, whether they need capital or not, I'll leave that for them to say. But in the end, they're the types of businesses that I would get capital for. But our business just didn't have that. But it will take longer. And that's the thing I think for entrepreneurs to understand too. It will take much longer to get to your destination. And it's true. I was talking about time being important. But if you're every day feeling fulfilled and you're doing something that's aligned with your purpose, your ethos, whatever you want to call it, or something that means something to you, then you don't feel like it's work, but you also feel like you don't mind if it takes an extra 2-3 years or 5 years even, because this is your life's work. This is your legacy. But on a dime, if something happens to it, you can't, at the same time, you can't be too attached to it where you can't see clearly. And that's a balance. You can love your idea, but not be in love with it. That's my perception. But that's definitely where it took me. It's taken me longer, but it's a much more interesting journey, I think, for our team.
There's an interesting book by Uri Levine, who is the founder of Waze, which was then acquired by Google. And his book is Fall in Love with the Problem. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I think that kind of is very fitting to what you're talking to is if you love the product too much and not the idea, then you're going to have a very hard time pivoting or evolving it because you want to make that thing work versus listening to the market or listening to the audience or whatever it may be. You mentioned you mentioned that time is very important, but you also mentioned that, you see a growing to a multi-billion-dollar company in the future. Do you see a time horizon on achieving that goal? Is that something in like your 2 to 5 year plan, many year plan?
I feel that growing to a multi-billion dollar company is something that we see in the next 5, 10 years, but it's not our objective. Our objective is to make a real difference in what we're doing through the online community groups, through democratizing advertising, through enabling all sizes of companies to compete. All of those things are more interesting for us to give a better quality of life, to enable privilege to the 99% that may not have certain privileges. As the top 1%. So that's more interesting to us. The multi-billion dollars, honestly, it's not in our thought process. It's just a natural part of what's going to happen as long as you do compounding consistent efforts. And
Yeah.
it's just a byproduct of it. So in the end, you give value to people first, money will come. You think of others first, you optimize for their experience first, money will come. So it's a mathematical certainty. You do this long enough, you do enough compounding consistency in any business that has some kind of value to others, you will make as much as you want to make. Just depends how far you're willing to go.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. I think when you chase the wrong thing, you're chasing your tail. You'll never actually get there. Versus having an ethos that you're chasing and working towards that goal, then um, if there is a sizable market against it, then you'll achieve that. You did mention as well potentially post placed, and I'm curious if there is a eventual exit plan, or if you've even had those exit conversations and what that might look like.
We haven't had the exit conversations with anyone, uh, just internally.
Right.
uh, in my head for now. But right now we're doing so many exciting things that
Yeah.
we're just we're climbing. We have a network of 150 million people. So in terms of what the online community reach that we have, and I'm very grateful for that. But I think it can double, it can triple, and there's so many exciting things that, and from the creator economy perspective, we're starting something coming up very soon that we're going to be announcing. That's something that's going to empower creators to also make money. And in this case, community owners to make money a different way other than just straight advertising. So we're working on something right now that we're going to be launching soon for that too. So those are the kinds of excitement. So I'm not thinking about an exit plan at this time. However, we are building the business in a way, we're growing to build a business in a way currently that is sustainable, repeatable, and something that we realize what will, in the end, be more attractive. Uh, but we're not optimizing for that North Star. We're just optimizing for our day to day, and those repeatable actions are things we need to be more efficient with our time. They just happen to be the things that people will also purchase at exit or want at exit.
Yeah, and the reason that I mean, it didn't sound like from what you've shared that that's kind of the trajectory right now, but knowing some of the other projects like working towards supporting immigration, those are meaty projects as well. So I was curious if that was kind of you're itching to take that on full time, which is where that question came from. Um, but
I
I
also
want to
I also want my son to get a good role in place too, if he chooses. And I think it'd be fun to get him in there for one of his first jobs.
How old is your son now? Like, is he already at job age or?
He's 9, but he's made money already as an actor. He's a little bit of an entrepreneur, but but he really likes Place. He's always a supporter of Place. He's so sweet, and his name's Jackson, and I certainly would love him in there as well, doing some pretty cool things there for communities.
I love that everything you're working towards is not the money end. It's like family and big picture, and it's meaningful. If they don't have a true passion towards the problem that they're solving, there is a monetary driver behind them, and that is very hard to stay motivated with that. So I love to hear your true motivations. It's very sweet. I want to jump to the last two questions for you of the podcast. Curious if there have been myths that you were told that you would want to dispel for future founders, or maybe even as you think of your son getting into the world of entrepreneurship and things that you want to dispel for him that he might hear.
That not every company has to be a multi-billion dollar or trillion dollar valuation type company in order to be successful. And the next myth I would say is that you don't have to hit a certain multiple in order to be validated by others. And don't chase, attract. Learn how to attract instead of chase.
What does that look like? Like, do you have an example of where you could have chased, but you worked towards attract instead?
Well, I won't say as a teenager what my answer would have been, but
As an
but
adult in a business sense, your
okay,
son can do a little bit of both throughout the next few years of his life, but
that's true. That's true. Totally. But I would say that you just have to believe in manifestation if you're to align with me on what I'm about to say, which is I do believe that you attract what you are, your level of frequency. So for example, if every day you're very grateful and you're also calling out what about for abundance. So if every day you're thanking God, spirituality, you're thanking just saying it out loud, and you're just grateful for everything. You're not taking anything for granted or minimally not taking things for granted. And then you add gratitude paired with a cocktail of thinking positive things, always being positive, and then going into the world with an intent to help others and do good things for people and try to add value to others as well. And then if you mix all those together, and then in addition to that, if you set the intention out loud and you do the action. So if let's say you want to start, a company in tech, then you start taking the education, say I want to do X, and then you go ahead and you start learning about it. You start finding out all the different tools, and every single day you do a little bit towards that goal. And if you do all of that mixed in together, I do believe that you end up attracting at a higher frequency, because then the things that you see, the people around you, you're building a network of people that clearly you're helping all the time and you're adding value to. And now you have this ecosystem of a strong network. You have this mindset that's positive, that you can always get through anything. And then, so whether you believe in the manifestation or not, those actions just automatically put you in a better position to succeed. So it's kind of like going to the gym, and you go to the gym every day and you're like, you know what, I kind of feel like eating healthier. I don't want to, I'm starting to look better in front of the mirror, and now I want to eat a little bit healthier. Now I don't feel like eating whatever I just ate, those fried foods as much. So it's that same kind of principle. You enthrall yourself in positivity and gratitude. All of a sudden the doors start opening up, and it's truly changed my life. And now I don't need to chase. I never need to chase. No one does. But I never feel like I needed to chase anymore. And now I feel that I'm so thankful that I'm attracting incredible people and opportunities in my life.
yeah, I totally agree with that. It makes such a difference once you open your mind to being able to see things a little bit differently. The very last question, as you know, the podcast is called How I Became, and we
Yes.
talk through a lot of your story and your journey. If you were to name this episode How I Became, based on where you currently are, what would you name this episode?
Well, I would call the theme of this episode that underdog.
I like it.
I
That's
like
a
that.
really good one. And I like the theme. Kaaveh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It was such a pleasure chatting and hearing your story, and I really appreciate you opening up
Thank you,
for the
Kelly.
podcast.